the Stanley Cup final almost here, the NHL trade rumor mill has been absolutely swirling. There's so many huge rumors surrounding the Winnipeg Jets, the Montreal Canadiens, and their plans for big trades on defense this offseason, the Toronto Maple Leafs GM search, as well as big plans for the Edmonton Oilers. We're going to be discussing all of that right here, right now. So watch till the end for every single trade rumor, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more trade videos just like this every single day. Now, when I told you guys the trade rumor mill was going crazy, I wasn't lying. Look at this from the Hockey Writers article just a little bit ago, talking about Connor Hellebuyck being in trade rumors, and this has actually been a really underrated story so far this offseason, and the Jets, what their future, what their offseason might look like. It seems like there's a pretty decent chance the Jets might be moving on from Connor Hellebuyck, interestingly so, and one of the biggest teams that we've heard linked to Hellebuyck has been the Buffalo Sabres. As per a report from the Athletic's Michael Russo and Eric Desjacek, the Buffalo Sabres seem to have a legitimate interest in trying to acquire a goaltender, Connor Hellebuyck, via trade. They write, one thing we've heard early this offseason is that the Sabres have interest in Hellebuyck with the belief that a genuine number one goaltender could be the last remaining piece in turning them into contenders. Getting one would also allow them to hold off on turning the reins over to Devon Levi until he's proven to be NHL ready. And that is huge, huge news with the Sabres and their apparent linkage to one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. And this last year was back at one of the best levels, and with Winnipeg was absolutely insane. Once again, carrying them in a lot of different ways. For Buffalo, I mean, Levi is obviously the future, but if they get Hellebuyck, they're making the playoffs next year. Put a bet on it. And it's interesting because I think honestly the Sabres and the Jets could spark a deal pretty easily here. I don't think Levi would obviously be a part of the deal, but I think the Sabres have a ton of young options on really every single position. They have one of the best prospect pools in the NHL, and just a few months ago when we were ranking prospect pools, I had them as the best in the NHL, and that's already with all the great players they already have on the NHL roster. So for the Sabres, they're in a really unique position, but in my opinion, splurging for Connor Hellebuyck is something I would do if the price is right. The only problem I really see when it comes to this is the contract, though, because when you look at Connor Hellebuyck, he's kind of in no man's land for the Sabres specifically. He will be a UFA after this next year. He's making $6.1 million, which is an absolute steal in every single way. But I feel like Hellebuyck's going to want a pretty long-term deal after this deal, trying to be locked up as long as he can in his 30s, which is what he should be doing. I mean, he should get a payday as much as humanly possible. And I don't know for the Sabres if they're going to be willing to do that. And I don't think Hellebuyck's going to want a maybe 2-year deal after this that will be perfect for Levi once he comes into the fold and is starter quality. So I think for the Sabres is going to be interesting. Do they just trade for 1 year Connor Hellebuyck? That might be what they would have to settle for. So in that respect, the trade price is kind of murky because on paper, I would say the Jets are definitely going to be expecting a first rounder, a top prospect, maybe a B tier player on the roster. But I feel like for the Sabres, that might be a little bit rich for them if they're only going to have Hellebuyck for one season. But at the same time, even that one season could be incredibly influential, and just having 1 year as a stopgap for Levi would be incredibly important too. And he could be the backup, and you can actually give Hellebuyck some much needed rest, which he didn't really quite have in Winnipeg. And I feel like it'll be a really interesting situation there, but I think the Sabres could still be in a unique spot where they still have the prospect pool to trade for 1 year Hellebuyck, give up a lot of assets, and still be pretty good. So maybe we see something of the likes of maybe the 2024 first round pick, maybe a defenseman and Ryan Johnson, who's a top tier prospect for them, and maybe Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen as a deal. That might be what we see. It might even still be an overpayment in some aspects for Buffalo if they're only going to keep Hellebuyck for one season, but it's interesting food for thought. Also, some really interesting head coaching news regarding the Calgary Flames specifically. They've been linked to Gerard Gallant, who of course was just fired from the New York Rangers. According to insider Darren Dreger at TSN, after leading the New York Rangers to multiple 100-point seasons, it shouldn't come as a surprise that Gallant is being considered as the top candidate for the Calgary Flames coaching position. That said, Dreger emphasizes that the Flames will conduct an extensive interview process, exploring other candidates and internal options, including the successful AHL coach Mitch Love. So really interesting notes there. I would say for the Flames, of course, I would say when we look at Suter, one of the biggest problems was playing those younger players. I don't think Gerard Gallant is going to be much better, but it would definitely be interesting to see him in Calgary. Now, we also got some pretty big stuff coming up in here on the Calgary Flames rival and Edmonton Oilers. Mark Spector of Sportsnet put out a really interesting article talking about what the future of the Oilers and their offseason might look like, and took a look at the Oilers offseason checklist and noted the top priority was trading Kailer Yamamoto's contract. He adds signing Evan Bouchard, choosing between a UFA of Matthias Janmark, Nick Dubois, Bjugstad and Derek Ryan are also issues for Holland to deal with. Spector also notes that it'll be important for Holland to clear a path for Dylan Holloway to be a regular in the NHL next season. He writes, if the trade deadline arrives and a problem exists, Holland can address it at that time. For now, getting Holloway's NHL career moving in earnest is paramount. Enough with slow playing this player. Now, there was also this extremely interesting part. Bruins and Oilers potential trade partners. Some more rumors surrounding their offseason. Boston Hockey's now Jimmy Murphy writes that the source told him the Boston Bruins could target the Edmonton Oilers for a potential future trade. He writes, when asked Monday about potential external replacements at center, the Boston Bruins could target if Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci retire. An NHL source told Boston Hockey now that the Oilers might move 30-year-old center Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and that they're looking for a defenseman in return. So some more big news there and a lot of interesting info in the Oilers talking about trading Kailer Yamamoto, but this is really the big thing. We saw Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in the playoffs, wasn't really all too effective after a 100-point season in the regular season, which was a little bit predictable, but at the same time, he might be a player the Oilers might be looking to move, and interestingly so, looking for a defenseman in return. Now, as we know, the Bruins have a plethora of defensemen. You, of course, got guys who aren't going to be traded for Nugent-Hopkins and McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm. But you got a few interesting options. Maybe Brandon Carlo is a part of things. Maybe Matt Grzelcyk, who was an extra for the Bruins for a lot of this season, but is the best extra in the NHL, can still hold his own weight incredibly well. Maybe they go after a player like Connor Clifton, perhaps. I'm not sure. Maybe in free agency. But to me, I think most likely it could be a player like Matt Grzelcyk, who isn't locked up too long-term, but can still be extremely good in his own end. But then again, no way is that enough for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, so maybe they go after a player like Brandon Carlo. The only problem with that is, of course, when we look at his no team trade clause, he has a 10-team no trade list. I would say probably a few Canadian teams are a part of that. Edmonton might not be an exception. And then going on to some big trade numbers regarding the Montreal Canadiens and their offseason plans. Of course, when we look at Montreal, their defense is a little bit questionable, especially right now, but in the future, there's going to be a little bit of interesting hole there for the Habs on that right side. As Mark Dumont of Montreal Hockey Now writes, the Montreal Canadiens might be planning to move a left shot defenseman to address holes on the right side of their defense during the offseason. He explains players such as Lane Hudson, Adam Engstrom, Petteri Nurmi, Jane Struble, Nicholas Bodin, and William Trudeau all shoot left, while Logan Mailloux is probably the only right-handed defenseman with a reasonable chance to eventually play in the NHL. He also notes that on the main roster, the left side is much deeper than the right. Dumont looked at 4 defensemen that could be targeted and noted John Klingberg, Damon Severson, Kevin Shattenkirk, and Radko Gudas could be names worth watching. So while the Canadiens might not directly trade a left shot D-man for a right shot, they could move a lefty in a separate deal and then target a righty in free agency. Now, if you guys remember, during the middle of this season, we made a video talking about big trade numbers of Montreal Canadiens, and one of the biggest things that was regarded there and was said and was revealed is that the Habs were going after John Klingberg. We're really close to signing him in last year's offseason, but it seemed like there might still be interest there. Of course, with John Klingberg having that one-year deal going from Anaheim to Minnesota and will likely be a free agent again, he could be a target of the Montreal Canadiens. I would absolutely not, in my personal opinion. He has some good attributes, but at the same time, again, defensively is just an absolute black hole, and I just don't think you really need that on the roster. Damon Severson can make some big mistakes here and there. Likely would be a little more expensive, and especially for term, but I would say if you're going to commit to a right shot, if you're going to go commit to a right side defenseman, Damon Severson is a much better bet for them. Kevin Shattenkirk would be interesting. Radko Gudas, of course, has had this massive run for Florida, so there's definitely not a lack of options for the Habs, but it seems like they will be going after a right D defenseman this offseason and will be have at least somebody else on that right side for the future for this Habs D-core, which I think is smart, but at the same time, they have to still be careful with it, especially managing their cap space. Now, to me, out of all those guys, I'll be targeting Radko Gudas if I'm the Habs. He would likely cost a lot after some fantastic years in Florida, especially these last couple. You can see the points he's been great, but defensively, physically, being that absolute monster in the corners, Gudas has shown to be one of the most consistent physical defensemen in the NHL, and he's not too old. He's 32 right now, but I think for the Habs, signing him to maybe a 3-year contract, having him as a great mentor for some of those younger players, I think would be so vital, would be extremely important, and on that right side would really fit it incredibly. I think for Montreal, that's the type of player I'd target way above a player like John Klingberg personally. And to me, especially with how this Habs team is looking, I'd much rather target an all-defense guy in Radko Gudas than an all-offense guy in John Klingberg. Sure, John Klingberg might be fun at points, but what he's going to give you that you would have gotten in 3 years, right? He's not going to give you really any long-term value. Radko Gudas, I mean, can give you that. Now, also some extremely interesting news here on the potential Blackhawks and Vancouver Canucks trade. The Athletic Scott Powers took a look at the NHL entry draft plans for the Blackhawks, and after saying they were certainly not going to trade their first overall pick, wondered if they might do anything else in the first round to try and move up in the draft. He writes, the Blackhawks aren't optimistic about their chances to move up from their second first round pick at number 19. Even if the Blackhawks package the number 19 pick in a second rounder or two, that probably isn't enough for a team to budge from a top 15 selection. The Vancouver Canucks might be the only team that can make sense. He goes on to explain the Canucks might be eager to make a move if that means freeing themselves from an overpriced contract. He notes if the Blackhawks took on one of the contracts and packaged a first and second round pick, maybe that would entice the Canucks to trade the number 11 pick. The Blackhawks know there would be some good players on the board. Number 11, Kyle Davidson is looking to be active. Now, there wasn't any explicit mention of Tyler Myers, but Tyler Myers would definitely be among those high salary names the Canucks might want to move. Now, of course, the Canucks and Blackhawks already have that history of cap moves. We have, of course, the Blackhawks acquiring Jason Dickinson and having the Canucks get rid of that contract. But when you look at things, I mean, what other contracts could there be there? Maybe Connor Garland I could see as a potential add. That might be something, but I don't think he's bad enough where you would have to give him up to basically be a cap dump, basically. But maybe he is. I mean, he makes $4.9 million for the next 3 seasons. That might be something that Vancouver's trying to get off the books. Maybe Tyler Myers, again, he makes $6 million, but only for this next year. To me, there's a few options you could possibly go for, but really, I think maybe Garland, maybe Tyler Myers make the most sense there. And for our last rumor here today, we're going to be talking about, again, the Toronto Maple Leafs GM search and the updates there. We talked about a couple of days ago about Mark Bergevin being a part of the GM conversation for the Leafs. This tweet, Elliotte Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast today said that he believes Treliving has been interviewed already. He doesn't know the full list of names of candidates that will be interviewed, but mentioned Botterill, Bergevin, and Chiarelli as potential names. So again, interestingly, we've seen that Treliving has kind of come away as the frontrunner these past couple of days, but again, names like Bergevin, names like Chiarelli are still potentially in the fold, which is just hilarious. But again, it does seem most likely that Treliving will be the guy for Toronto. But those are all the updates on the NHL trade rumor mill. Thank you so much for watching. So much to break down today, and thank you for watching until the end. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already for more trade rumor content just like this all throughout the offseason. We're going to be pushing so many videos out like this. And of course, comment down below all your thoughts on the trade rumors. What do you think about the Jets and Connor Hellebuyck? What do you think about the Nugent-Hopkins trade idea? What do you think about the Oilers ideas and the Flames ideas and the Leafs ideas and the Canucks ideas and everything mentioned? Do you think the Sabres should be trading for Connor Hellebuyck? Let us know all your thoughts down below. Of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Goodbye.